Why would some politicians fight so hard to get as many illegal immigrants into the United States as possible, even though those immigrants can't vote? Well, we're going to talk about it on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. I'm going to go right to an interview that I did with an expert on the subject of migration from the Center for Immigration Studies. Check this out. Dr. Stephen Camarotta is the Director of Research for the Center for Immigration Studies, and he joins us now. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Camarotta. I really appreciate it. I have really enjoyed reading some of your articles over the years about the effects of migration, whether it's legal or illegal immigration, into the United States. The one thing I wanted to talk about with you today has to do with apportionment. That is, we have 441 seats in the House of Representatives, 435 represent the states, and then there's a few extras there for the District of Columbia and Guam and stuff like that. Those get apportioned out by the census at the, the decennial census, is that how you say that? And so how does that get affected by the number of migrants that are in the country?
Right, so maybe it might surprise your listeners, but it's very clear from the research that, like in the last census, about 10 million illegal immigrants responded to the census. They either sent their census forms back or were counted by census employees when they went out and interviewed people. And so that 10 million then has an impact on the distribution of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. As you said, there's 435 voting seats. The first 50 are distributed based on one per state. But then after that, it's a proportional system. So if your population is bigger, you get more seats. And since there are about 750,000 people per congressional seats, that's very roughly what it will be in 2020. If California has 2 or 3 million illegal immigrants, you can see how they can easily gain a seat or two from that. Now, it depends on the distribution across states as well. So it's both a function of their distribution and their numbers. So
how many seats would be at risk then after the 2020 census of flipping one way or the other?
Yeah, it looks pretty clear that in 2020, if the number of illegal immigrants who currently are in the country we think will be counted in 2020, then you would guess that it looks pretty clear, as I say, that 4 seats would change hands. As a result of illegal immigrants. If you counted all non-citizens, there are about 22 million non-citizens in the United States. About 11 million are illegal immigrants. 11 million are various types of illegal immigrants. It may surprise you, but even foreign students and guest workers and such, and there's over 1 million of those as well, they get counted in the census, and congressional seats get drawn for them. So if you counted all non-citizens, including the green card holders and those long-term temporary visitors, you're looking at maybe 9 seats perhaps being redistributed. And if you did all immigration, legal, illegal, including the naturalized citizens, then you might get up to 14 or 13 seats being redistributed.
Yeah, so it could make a very big difference in the outlook for the next presidential election or whatever. But now, yes or no?
It could. I'm trying to recall, and right now I'm having kind of a senior moment where I can't remember whether the apportionment will have taken place by the 2020 election. It has to occur before November, and I cannot recall whether that will be the case because the census is conducted in April, but I believe that the final results are not in until the end of the year.
Okay. Well, anyway, it will affect politics going forward, one way or the other, whether it's this election or the next one. But
absolutely. So I just want to make one other point. So you were talking about apportionment, but there's another huge impact that you have to think about, and that is the seats in the Electoral College are drawn based on the number of seats you have in the House of Representatives as well, in addition to electoral votes within a state. So what this means is that, say, rural California or parts of California that have fewer illegal immigrants get less representation, and then that for the state legislature or for the congressional districts. Remember, there's 50 plus House seats for Congress in California, and they're drawn within the state, not just apportion between the states, but within the state, the inclusion of illegal immigrants means that political power is redistributed. So illegal immigrants in New York State live mostly downstate. So that means a lot more political power in the state legislature, in the congressional delegation, as a result of illegal immigrants. And of course, everything from the sewer authority, maybe districts, to city council seats and county commissioners and freeholders, that's all drawn based on population from the census. And they're all redrawn as well based on the inclusion of illegal immigrants. So it isn't just apportionment. It's also the Electoral College, and it's every state and local election where there's districts.
So would this tend to benefit the Democrats more than the Republicans? And if so, why?
Yeah, in general, but this isn't always true, what this redistribution does is it takes seats away from places and areas comprised mostly of U.S. citizens, so that you can create districts in areas comprised mostly of non-citizens. And in those areas, the Democrats tend to win. So it depends on which states lose seats. But in general, it tends to take seats away from areas that are more Republican leaning, and most definitely create states that have very few citizens or modest numbers of citizens, where the remaining citizens, or those citizens that are there, are mostly Democrats. So that's sort of what it does do. So it has partisan implications. Yes.
Okay, well, now I've been reporting on the border for a long, long time, and one of the things we've heard over and over again, kind of explaining why Democrats fight so hard against closing the southern border and allowing unfettered migration into the United States, is that they're essentially trying to elect a new populace. That is, they would like for these people to come in. They know that they're probably going to trend more Democrat, and they're going to eventually try to give them citizenship so that they can vote in our elections, and then solidify a majority for the Democrats for forever, basically. However, this apportionment thing, these people don't have to become citizens. They're just counted in the census, and I think that's one of the reasons why they have fought so hard to keep from having the citizenship question on the census. Although, even if we counted it, that wouldn't necessarily mean that they would be excluded from the apportionment, right?
Well, I'm not sure I understood your last question.
Well, what I'm saying is, if we the Republicans have talked about putting a question on the next census about citizenship. Are you a citizen or not? So that we can at least know how many are in the country. But even if we had that question on there, based on our current law, it wouldn't change the way that things get apportioned, would it? Like I'm saying, if we figured out,
you would then have to have a second step in which you said, we're only going to apportion seats or draw districts based on the presence of citizens. So they could do that, I suppose, but then that would end up in the courts, and the courts would tell us the answer. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but simply putting the question on makes no difference to what we're talking about right now. On the political question, it is certainly true that in general, it's assumed that immigrants and their children are voting for the Democratic Party about 2-1 over the Republicans. So there are lots of immigrants who are Republicans, lots of their children are Republicans, but overall, the picture's pretty clear. It's about 2-1. That being said, that probably plays some role. The political interests of the Democratic Party are well served by ongoing mass immigration. However, I think that Democrats mostly see it as a civil rights issue, that people kind of have a right to come to the United States, or if they don't have a right, keeping them out is mean-spirited. Look, they just want a better life. That's what everybody wants. Why would we do that? And the motive, and so from their point of view, they don't like the motives of people who defend American sovereignty or the border or want to enforce the laws. They see that as, at the very least, mean-spirited, and at the worst, racist. And so I think that's the primary motive. The fact that it also pays big political dividends, well, that's just a bonus. It's one of those situations where your moral sense and your sort of business/professional interests perfectly align. And whenever that happens in life, it's very hard to see the perspective of other people, and that's sort of what's happened to the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's very fair. I talk to Democrats, and that's the issue that they bring up, is that, hey, people should be able to live where they want. And I can't disagree with that. I think the difficulty is when people choose to come and live here mostly because, rather than, for example, Hondurans going to a safer part of Honduras, or going to a safer part of Guatemala, or going to live in Mexico in a safer place. But coming to the United States, or like I'm talking about on the podcast here in the last couple of days, Cameroonians coming all the way over to the United States, rather than, there's lots of countries in between where they could live a good life and have a better life, but they're coming to the United States specifically because of the pull factors in the United States. And one of those pull factors is the incredible amount of benefits that they can get from free housing, free education, free medical care, different things like that. I heard you talking to Tucker Carlson about remittance taxes. I didn't feel like Tucker gave you a chance to really explain yourself. It felt like he wanted to do all the talking. So I want you to tell me a little bit about your opinion there. Why don't we already have a remittance tax? And would that be a good solution for trying to at least fund maybe the Southern Wall or something?
Yeah, you could try to make people who are sending money home pay a tax. We tax every other financial transaction. There's no reason you couldn't tax this one. You could debate whether we should have taxes on things, but since we tax everything from a stick of gum to your house or car, there's no reason you can't tax a financial transaction overseas. So you could do that. Actually, there is a state that has a tax on money sent.
Oklahoma, right?
Right. So there's no reason you can't do it. Now, people could obviously bundle money and just mail it back or carry it back and so forth and try to avoid this. But yeah, there's no reason that you couldn't tax remittances. That could generate a fair amount of money. Even a small tax could certainly generate hundreds of millions of dollars, which you could then use for enforcement. It doesn't really get at the core problem. I mean, the big, profound questions are, when it comes to immigration, does a country have a right to decide who comes into their country? And when they decide that, do they have a right to select people they think are going to benefit the country or not? There's some of the big questions, right? Most people think, yeah, of course, it's part of democracy. We get to pick who comes to our country, and then we have a right to enforce it, and we have a right to have a selection criteria like education level or skills or a job offer or something that we think will make sense. Most immigrants come to the United States to work. Most immigrants work, but they also access welfare programs at extremely high rates as well, because a large fraction of immigrants, especially illegal immigrants, have very modest levels of education. So they earn low wages, pay relatively little in taxes, and then are able to sign their children or themselves up for a host of non-cash, in particular, welfare programs that obviously cost taxpayers many billions of dollars. They don't necessarily come for the welfare, but they may come for the free public education, which is worth a lot. But that is what happens. So why immigration is very different than, say, it was 120 years ago. In 1910, the United States didn't have a welfare state. Today we do. And so that's one of the reasons. The other big question you have to ask and decide is, there's a lot of evidence that people at the bottom end of the U.S. labor market, native-born of all races, have struggled. They don't make much money, a large fraction don't work, and this has created a cascading series of consequences for them, for everything from crime to the opioid epidemic, non-marriage when they have children and all that.
Right.
As a consequence, if you bring in lots of unskilled immigrants, hardworking, eager people, to be nannies, maids, busboys, fast food, restaurant workers, you tend to exert downward pressure. You tend to crowd out the native-born, and as I say, you exert downward pressure on wages, and that can further exacerbate social problems. But of course, that's assuming the immigrant works, and most do. Yeah. So it's not that they came to do that. It's not that there's some desire to harm Americans, but that can be the consequences. Yeah. But our immigration system mostly favors the more affluent in the United States, whether they're college educated or business owners.
I've always said that you can't blame people for, if somebody's giving out free cookies, you can't blame people for getting in line. And that's exactly what happens. They come here, they learn how to use and even game the system. I have some friends I met that came here from Cuba, walked all the way up through the Darien Gap in Panama and made it to the southern border and got in right under the wire with the wet foot, dry foot rule. And then immediately, they came from Cuba where they were making $45 a month between the two of them, husband and wife, as school teachers. within 2 weeks in the United States, they had signed up for programs in 2 different states. And they learned that they could sign up as 2 single people rather than a married couple and get twice as much money. And they were making $3,200 a month from those programs within a matter of weeks. Now, they both ended up going to work, but they were very careful to work under the table for cash and making $15 an hour or so living in Miami. And the last time I saw them, they were making $60,000 a year. Now, that's like winning the lottery for somebody in Cuba. And a lot of that money ends up getting turned around and sent back to Cuba to finance the next wave of their relatives to come up and do the same thing. So I think
that can happen. Cuba is a special case because, like, they're considered under the same general category as refugees, so they have eligibility upon arrival of all welfare programs, and so that's a special case. But certainly that happens.
Yeah, and maybe not to that extent, but we certainly see that cycle of people coming in, either working and or participating in the welfare system, and then turning that money back around, sending it back home to finance their relatives coming up. I live in Latin America. I talk to people all the time who do that. They pool their money to send one of their relatives north, and with the specific intent that relative will get money however he can and send it back and bring the rest of the family at some point. So that's another thing that's got to be addressed for sure. Well, thank you very much for your time. We're out of time for today. I'd love to have you on again. I really appreciate you and your work and the fairness that Center for Immigration Studies brings to the debate around this very important topic for our country. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
All right. God bless you.
So that's all we've got for today, folks. Thanks for being a part of the podcast. I hope you'll like and share it. This is first-rate journalism that you're seeing here. This is the kind of thing, the guests that we're bringing you on this show are not your run-of-the-mill everyday people. These are experts who can speak to the topics at hand, and I hope that you'll get something out of that. I hope that it's valuable to you. We're doing our best to give you really good content, and so like and share the podcast, please. And other than that, we'll see you back here again tomorrow. I'm Chuck Holton, and this is The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.